Welcome to the third part of the Gloomwood inventory tutorial. In this part, we're going to be going over interaction, and more specifically interaction with items. So that means we're going to go over creating our items as an actual actor that we can interact with, and an actual interaction component that will allow us to walk up to it and see a name with how many in quantity there is, the name of it, and a button to press to pick it up. We're not going to do the pickup today because that requires to have the inventory ready, but we're also going to set up some structures and other little bits to help with this. This will also include obviously importing the grab animation, and we'll also quickly go over how to use a montage to actually make sure that when the hand hits the ground, it's the moment that it picks up and not just with a delay. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. We want to start by importing the assets, or the asset called grab.fbx, into the editor under asset skeletal mesh. Then you'll see this screen pop up. The first thing you're going to want to do is you want to go down to the common meshes and set the force all meshes as type to be skeletal mesh, as that is what we're actually importing right now. Then you want to look in the category called static mesh and disconnect or uncheck the import static mesh. And once you've done those three things, click import and you should have the following appear: the mesh, but also the animation as well. And these are from Mixamo, if ever you're wondering. So if you want to go and check out some other animations, you're free to do that. This one's just a basic one to pick up items. So next, what you want to do is you want to right click on the grab, or in your case, it might have a different name, and right click and select retarget animation. And you want to make sure that before you do anything, before selecting any of the meshes here, as I'm doing, you want to make sure you leave it on the default one, Mixamo mesh, and select the grab animation in the category below. And once the animation is playing on the left, only then do you want to select the target. And make sure you do it in this order, otherwise it can cause issues with both of your skeletal meshes, which you don't want. Once you see both characters next to each other playing the animation, you click on export animation and you get this little pop-up, and you get to place it wherever you want. In our case, it's going to go into skeletal mesh with the rest. And you want to give it the prefix n underscore just so we can differentiate it from the old grab. And now you can see it, you can open it up and see it playing on the actual third person character or Quinn skeletal mesh. With that out of the way, we can now get back into the main part of this episode. We're going to start the interaction off by going into our utility folder, and we're going to make, our structure folder, and we're going to make exactly that. We're going to make two structures by right clicking, going into blueprints and looking for structure. First one we're going to call st underscore inventory item, and that's going to be used to store the actual information in the inventory, because even though we have a data asset, the data asset can never be modified. It should be treated as read-only when we're actually playing. So to actually keep information, update information like the amount of items currently in a slot or something like that, we need a structure. The next one is a second structure, right-click structure. The second one is going to be used for what I call pre-populating. So what that means is, whereas this one will keep the information of the item we are using, this one will be used in the editor to say, oh, well, this is the item that we're going to create. So this is going to be called st pre-populate. Just like that. So let's go through the st inventory item first and open it up. So in our structure, we get default values we can change later. It's not very useful. We're just going to change one of them, but for now we'll do the structure first and then we'll get to that. So first, we're going to start by putting the coordinates of the item. And the reason we're doing this here, and so this is going to be a 2D vector, the reason we are having the coordinates is because this time we won't be using a map. And the reason we're not using a map is because using a map works really well if we have a normal inventory. But if you have an inventory with shapes, be it squares or be it any shape like we had with an L or a J or a T, you need to have the coordinates be in the item itself and not use a map. Because if you use a map, it means that two items can never have the same key. And that isn't good, because in the case of an inventory like ours, it can sometimes happen that the slot 00 could be occupied by two items because of how they may line up together. So after this, we need the quantity. So this is the quantity. And it is the amount of items that are currently in the slot. And after, we also have max quantity, which is going to be based on the amount or the total that one slot or one item can have. And that's going to be based on the data asset, which we already created. Next, we're going to get the item name, or just name, and that's also based on the data asset, and that's going to be of type text. Next, obviously, the model. So model, we'll call it, which is going to be a static mesh. This one right here, object reference. Then we want the shape. And this is going to be the 2D vectors locally of the item. So search for 2D vector right here and make sure we turn it into an array, because that's how it is set in our data asset. It is the same thing here. And we also want our rotation. And this is because at once again, this is to showcase what happens at runtime. And at runtime, we can change the rotation. So we need to know what the rotation of the item is. And one last one, which we're going to have, is object reference. And this one is particularly used to know what item we are referring to. And to do that, we want to look for our DA underscore item. And we're not just going to put a object reference, we're going to put a soft object reference, because we don't actually need to know the hard reference. We just need to know kind of source of it. It doesn't matter if it's loaded or not, because it is only a type of item. So it's like comparing a class. And the reason we can't do this as a class reference is because the class reference would always return DA item. And the last thing we need to do is in our defaults, we want to make sure we set this by default to -1, -1. And the reason we do that is because -1, -1 will mean that we are outside of the inventory. That's what it's for. So save, and we can close this. Now, for pre-populate, we're going to do something a lot simpler. For pre-populate, all we want is we are going to get a quantity. Can't seem to write tonight. A quantity, and that's going to be an integer. And we're going to tell it what data asset we're going to use, because this is going to be, once again, it is used to have in the editor on our item once we place it on the ground and say, okay, well, this item is going to be a ring, it's going to be an L shape, it's going to be a healing item. And then we just need to tell it based on that, well, this will give it its appearance, it will give it its data, its max, its shape, everything, but it won't tell it, for instance, what quantity it has by default. So to do that, we need to have this information here. So that's going to be a DA items, and this time it has to be an object reference. So this will be our data asset, we'll call it. And I know sometimes some people do follow these tutorials with their own projects. So if in any case you are doing this and using, let's say, a data table instead, then I'm just going to add here what it would look like. We're not going to use it, but this is how you would apply it if you were using a data table, because data tables, although not the same, can have a similar method here for this. So we're going to say instead, we're going to say data table, and we can choose row handle. And what this will allow you to do once I show it in defaults is we'll call this, for instance, data table instead of data asset. If we go into default rows, we can actually tell it what data table we're looking for, and then we can also tell it what exact row, and we would have the same information that you would have in a data asset, but via the data table. So I'll leave it here, but we're not going to use it. I'll just leave it there for now so I can show later if we do need to use it or how it would be applied. So close this, done with that as well. And so now let's make our actor. Let's make our first actor blueprint in this whole system. So right click, blueprint class, actor. And this is going to be called A_items. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it straight away. Right now, the whole system is designed in a way that it never needs to reference A items. So if you have your own item, as long as you follow what we're going to do here in our A items, you'll be fine to set it up for the whole system as well. You won't actually need to create a separate item for that if you don't want to. So open up A items and let's get started. So we're going to go through the variables first, and we're going to start by getting our pre-populated info. So call this pre-populated info. And this is going to be the structure that we just made. So st underscore pre-populate. Make sure it is exposed on spawn. We don't need it to be, instance editable. We don't need it to be exposed on spawn. So we're going to compile, and we're just going to show what the point of this is. So if we drag one in here, look at it right now, it doesn't do anything obviously. But what we want to do is right in our defaults, we can see pre-populated info. And we get to set its quantity. So we can say, well, there's 5 of them. There's 5 items. And then we can say it's going to be of this type. And so what this will do is it will allow us to say, okay, this item will have this appearance, this item will have this amount of information, and that's how we set it on the ground. Because if we do it in the inventory later, we're also going to have a system where we can say, oh, well, I want this inventory component to have these kind of items by default. And we'll use the same system there as we did here. Let's get the next one. So next we want another variable, which is going to be our item data. And our item data is going to be our structure as well. So st underscore inventory, we called it, inventory item. This though needs to be instance editable, so the I, and exposed on spawn. And the reason for that is because if we want to spawn this item from, for instance, say we have the inventory, we open our inventory, it will spawn our item if it has already been told that it had an item in it to start with. Then we need to be able to say spawn actor of class and tell it what data needs to go in. And so we can just pass that through here with our exposed on spawn. Now, one thing that does become annoying because of that, so if we go and look here at our thing again, we can now see item data. And it's a bit confusing because you don't usually want to touch this because it is item data. This is going to be set based on this information, so shouldn't be necessary to touch this. So to avoid it appearing there, we can tell it to be advanced and make sure it is set to advanced display. Now, this isn't a perfect solution, but it does mean that it appears in its own little category here called advanced, and you don't have to open it, it won't be visible. Next up is going to be a variable we're not going to set up yet because it's not useful yet. We'll use it in inventory only. And it's going to be called text location. And just a heads up what this is for. What text location is going to be is it's going to be an enumerator. And that enumerator is going to be used to tell our item quantity, the text of it, where it's supposed to appear. So is it in the top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left? That's what it's for. So for now, we'll just put it as a byte and we'll leave it on the side for now. Next, we have z offset. And it's going to be a float, and we're also not going to use this now. But what this one does, so that I'll re-explain these obviously when we use them, but what z offset is for is when we drag our items across the inventory. By default, how it's going to work is we're going to say, well, a line trace is hitting here, that's where the item spawns. That's the basis of it. But the problem is, if you start doing that, you will start dragging your items through one another, and it might start overlapping, and it won't look nice. So this z offset is specifically for that. It allows us to say, oh, well, shift an item that you're moving by this much off from the inventory itself. That way we don't overlap them. And in our case, it's going to be 100 because our grid kind of box system is 100 by 100 on the Tetris blocks. So that's how that works. Next, we want another float, and this is going to be called current rotation. And we are also not going to use it, but what it is for is pretty self-explanatory. It is going to keep track of how the rotation is as we move it. And the reason for that is because our item data here, we only want to change it once we have placed it, once it is secure, so to speak. And finally, one last one, which we also won't be using. There's a lot of these. It's going to be called last valid world location. And it's going to be a vector. And also, once again, very self-explanatory. Once we move an item from the world to our inventory, if let's say there's no place in the inventory, it needs to know where to return to. And we're going to use this variable here to determine that. How do we get this into this? How do we transfer that information? The way we're going to do that is we are going to use a blueprint interface. And so we're going to go and create that, and we are going to use it, put it in the structure as well, alongside our game rules and our macro library. So right click in blueprints, go to blueprint interface, and we'll call this BPI share info, because that's kind of the main purpose of it. And we're going to start by, well, we're just going to go through all of these. So pretty much we're going to be making a function for every single piece of information on the structure that we just made, and that is going to start by get coordinates, and get coordinates needs to output the 2D vector. So we're looking for 2D vector, and we'll just call this return value. And I'm going to copy the return value because I'm going to be pasting it everywhere. So another one, this is going to be called get quantity, and output is going to be an integer. We're going to paste our return value. We'll duplicate this, and this is going to be called get max quantity. Once again, return value same. Duplicate it again. We'll call this get name. Just capital there, and this is going to be text. Then we'll duplicate it again. This one is get static. We'll just call it get 3D model. This is going to be our static mesh. So this one, once again, object reference. Duplicate it again, and this one is get shape. This is going to be our 2D vector once again, and our array. Next, we want get rotation. We'll return our float, so make sure you put it back to a single. Duplicate again, and this is our final one, which is get object. And get object will be our DA underscore item, and make sure you set it as a soft object reference. As now we can compile, we can save, and we can close this. We don't need it anymore, at least not for now. We're going to come back to it in the next few parts, but for now, we're good. And the first thing we're going to start off is we are going to set it up in our data asset, because that is the place where everything starts, and it's going to send all the information over. So to add a blueprint interface, we want to go into class settings, and this works for obviously any U object in Unreal Engine. We want to go down to our interfaces, and we're going to say add. We're going to search for BPI share info, and that will make a new category here called interfaces appear. And we're just going to go through them, double click, and we're going to share the information that we need. So for our object, we're going to say get self. And if you just drag self into the return value, it will automatically convert it to a soft reference. That's exactly what we want. Get rotation, we don't need, because there is no rotation in the data asset itself. That's determined later. Get shape, though, we do need. We want to get default shape, we'll pass it here, and it is always going to be the default shape. That's one thing that I didn't mention. The system is going to be set up so that the default shape here is always going to be in our item data as well, and it is never going to change. This shape should never change, so that it's always as simple as possible to follow. So default shape here, we can close these two. Next is 3D model. 3D model we have, it is right here. Place it here. Then we have name, which we also do have. So we're going to get our name, we're going to pass it through here. And finally, we have get max quantity, which is the last one we can pass in, which is max quantity here. Plug it in, and we are done. So that does it for DA items. Now, what this allows us to do, we're going to set this up in our construction script actually, is it allows us to go in here and say, okay, get our item data here. Not our item data, sorry. Get our pre-populated data. Get our, so break it. And then we can actually say, okay, have we selected a data asset? So to check if we have, we can say is valid. And so if it is valid, that means that we have selected a data asset which is usable. So we're gonna collapse this or hide unconnected pins so we can move it. And if this is true, we're gonna do two things. First, we are going to tell our, well, actually we don't have that. So we're actually going to do our components first, sorry. So in the components, add a scene. Actually, no, we don't need a scene because we already have a default scene right here. So look for a static mesh, and it should appear below, and leave it as is We're going to get to that in a second. Then looks for a text renderer and make sure it's attached here. And finally, a sphere. Not a sphere, sorry. A sphere collision. Now make sure that is also attached to the static mesh, although that doesn't matter too much to that. So now that we have this, we know that this is bad. So from it, we can now say get our pre-populated data asset. And obviously, once again, if you are using the, sorry, I forgot to mention this. If you're using a data table, you can't obviously use isValid, but I'm not sure if we have a means to check. I think if we break this, we can then say, does data table row exist? And so you would just replace what we've done here with what we're doing here. And this will check if it exists. And then we can just say get row data. And then you would just pass out the type here by saying, for instance, break the specific type you want. So in our case, it's not this. It would be something maybe like you would have this or something similar to this. And this is what you would use instead. So close this for now, close this. That's how you would do it. Once again, let's re-put this back to how it was. And let's get on to the next one. So because we just set up our blueprint interface and we know the data asset here uses our blueprint interface because we've just done it, we can say get static, get 3D model is valid. And with that, we can then say, well, our static mesh, set static mesh, plug this in here. And we'll just add a reroute here. There we go. And so now if we compile, save, in the viewport, nothing's going to happen because by default, if we look at our default class defaults, we don't have anything set here, and that's fine. But if we look here, we've actually told it to use the T block. So it used the T block. If we change that to L, it will change it to L, change it to I, it will change to I. And so that's what this is for. Now, another problem we have is if we say, let's say 99 in quantity, that is incorrect. That is not going to work, and that's wrong. So let's make a change for that. We'll do the same thing as here. We know this data asset is valid, so we will say, once again from here, get max quantity. And we will say within here, our pre-populated info, we're going to say set members right here. And what we want to set is we just want to change the quantity. And we want to make sure the quantity is never, so we're going to say, we're going to call max integer. And it's never going to be, what this means, what max does for those who are unfamiliar, even I think we used it in the last part, or min. What max does is it just chooses the maximum of the two values. Sorry, not max, we want min. Because if it's min, sorry, the reason we want min is because if this right here is, let's say, 10, and if we pass in 20, it's going to choose the lowest value. If we pass in 5 and this is 10, it will choose 5. And so we can just expand this here so we can pass in the quantity as well. So just line all this up. There we go. And so now, if we look here, we shouldn't be able to pass in more than we can. And the reason it's saying 0 here is because I believe in iBlock, we never actually passed more than 0. So let's put this to 10. And now if we go back out here, we can put it to 9, no problem. If we put it to 11, it'll cap it at 10. Now, we also need to make sure that in addition to what we did with our data asset here, to allow us to use these, we also want to do the same thing within here, because the data asset only handles the locked information, the information that can't change. But we also need information that can change, like rotation and coordinates. So we are going to go into our class settings. We're going to go into implemented interface, and we'll look for BPI, once again, share info. And in our interfaces, same thing as before, but this time it's much easier to do. We're just going to get our item data, and we are going to say break. And from break, we're just going to pass through the appropriate values. So here we have get objects. So we just pass in our object reference. And we're just going to copy this and just repeat across get rotation and all the other getters here, just by simply getting the structure and passing it through. Now we're going to make it so that once we press begin play, this actually sets up properly. Because right now, this looks okay, but it's still doing it just based on this. If we look at our item data, it's still empty. So we're going to set up our item data now, and then we'll move on to the interaction part. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little check here. We're going to say get owner, and we're going to check if this is valid. And the reason we're doing this is because once we have the inventory set up, if an item has an owner, it means it's owned by the inventory. And in that case, it needs to be set up differently because it has been spawned by the inventory. The information it has does not come from the pre-populated info, but from item data. So we're just going to handle the false for now. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say by default, if the item is on the floor, meaning it is not in the inventory, we're going to hide the text. So we're going to say set hidden in game, and we're going to put it to true right here. And if we look at that, normally if we play now, we just see the item itself, the static mesh. And next, we're going to do the whole pre-population thing. So I'm just going to add a reroute here, and we're going to select this, and we're going to say collapse nodes. And we're going to say convert pre-populated. The reason we're doing it this way is because otherwise it becomes a very big mess that just goes quite long. So we just do that. And we'll also take the chance to just say our last valid world location is get actor location. Not that. Get actor location. There we go. Let's get this and let's go through the whole thing here. So I'm just going to move these back to the start. So let's start. So the way I like to do this is we get our item data, we say set members, and the members we need are quantity, max quantity, name, model, shape, and object reference. We don't need rotation and we don't need coordinates. Now it probably would be best, to be fair, to open that up. So we're just going to go back to our structure, and I'm going to move the ST inventory around. We're going to move our rotation under the coordinates. And the reason for that is just because these are the two that change actively with quantity. So these three can actually change, these 5 do not. So close that, and now it should have changed how this is organized. There we go. So this is what we need to set. And so this is going to be the last bit that goes out. And we're just going to go one by one. Now, for quantity, because in our construction script we set this up, we know that the pre-populated data is correct and can never be wrong. So we can just get from our pre-populated break and just immediately pass the quantity in. And we're just going to collapse this. And that does it for our first one. Now for max quantity, on the other hand, we're going to start with our actual data asset, and we're going to get our max quantity. So get max quantity. So this is our BPI. Now, the best one I like to use is the message, and it doesn't always appear because it's made to be done with an object reference. So if you can't find it, normally you can just say get max quantity, and it will automatically understand that we're talking about the BPI here. So this one also works. So we'll use this one. So it looks yellow here because it's telling it to go through the interface. So like this, plug this in here, and we'll add a reroute so that it just looks a bit nicer, because this is going to get a bit messy when you have 5 of them going here. So then we want to copy this again. We're going to say get name, and you either get these two. So it's either going to be DA items or it's going to be BPI share, but what you're going to be very careful of is that you don't get these ones, because if, for instance, we type right here without dragging from our data asset and we say get name, it's actually going to call the A items one. It's going to call this one right here, and we don't want that. So this obviously won't work because it's not the same type. Just be careful that you do use one of these two. So we're going to try and stick to the same one by saying get name, and we'll get the BPI share one. So plug this in here. Once again, reroute to make it more readable. Line this up with Q, and we can get the next one, which is going to be our model. So get 3D model, plug this in as well. Then paste again, get shape. And the last one, which is our get object, plug it into the input pin, line it all up, plug the last one in here. And there we go. Okay, so this will do it normally for setting up this whole item data. So if we compile and save and just test it out by going and play, right here, if we look at our item itself and we go down to our advanced, we can actually see still -1, haven't changed there, rotation is still 0, quantity is 10, max is 10, we have the name, we have the shape, we have the model, we have the shape, and we have a reference to the object itself. And the coordinates are good. So that seems to have worked. Next up is the actual interaction part. So I just closed that. We actually need it for a second because we have a little issue. We want to make our sphere a bit bigger here. So just select your sphere and set something like 200. And you can just check how big that looks. Yeah, it's about right. It could be a bit small, but it's not too much of an issue for the tutorial. Let's close that. And next up, we're going to make a actor component. So we're going to right click blueprint class, and we're looking for actor component. And this is going to be called AC interact. And double click, and we also want to open our third person here, our blueprint, our third person character. Now, if you're using a first person or if you're using your own character, open that and just say add and look for AC interact and just add it here. Nothing else. That's all we have to do, and then we can compile, save, and close this. Now, before getting into our interact component, we first need one last thing, and that is the inputs. So we're going to right click in our Gloomwood and make a new folder for our inputs. We're going to right click, we're going to look in our input section here. We're going to look for input action. We're going to call it IA pick up. And we're going to right click on it and we're going to say create mapping context. And this will be for IMC interact, we'll call it. And inside of it, we normally have our pickup already. If not, just press the plus and add it. I'm going to put it on F. If you're using Unreal Engine 5, you should be able to add input actions here and have them actually work like if they were on a character. So look for IA underscore pickup. And so normally, if you've set this up correctly, you should be able to see it now. It won't work immediately. And the reason it won't work immediately is because we need to add it. So to do that, we're going to say get player controller, and we want to check if it's VAD. It should in most cases be VAD. No, very rarely happens that it isn't. We want to look for enhanced input local player subsystem, and we want to call add mapping context. Now, for those who don't know what add mapping context does, is it will add the actual mapping context we made here to the character, to its controller, so that we can actually call this input action here. So we're looking for IMC interact. Okay, so to test if this works, if we've added it all correctly, on triggered, we're going to print hello. So compile, close this, press play, and if we press F, it says hello. Now, we don't need it to do it on triggered like that, so we're just going to go into our IA pickup. We're going to change our trigger here, so add plus, and we're going to turn it into pressed. And so that should mean now, if we run it, it should only happen once. There we go. So I'm holding it right down here, but if I spam it, it does also appear multiple times. So that does it for IMC and IA pickup. We are good there. We're going to create a custom event. So search for custom event, and this is going to be called begin overlap. And what we're going to look for is we are going to look for the actor. So we're going to look for actor. We're going to look at what actor we're overlapping, and that's all. We don't need to know if it's an item. We just need to know that it's an actor. So we'll say begin or target, we'll call it. And we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to have the same thing for end overlap. Now, with this, we are going to need to store this information. And to store that information, we're going to need a variable of type actor. So search for actor. There we go. And we want this to be an array. So right click it to turn it into an array. And we'll call this overlapping actors. And here what we're going to say is we're going to say add. So right here, add. And there we go. That does it. That's all we have to do for now. We're going to test this in a second because I completely forgot something in the item that we need to redo. On the other hand, on remove, we're going to go here and we're going to check if this is within our overlapping actors. We're going to say contains. And so if it does, which in most cases it should, unless there was an issue, but in most cases it should, we're then going to reroute here, and on true, we're going to add another reroute, and we're going to right click and say collapse the function. We're going to say remove from interaction. Plug in on true, and we'll get to that in a second. First, we're going to check that this works by adding a print here and a print here, and we're going to put goodbye on the second one. Open our A item again, so in blueprints. And so what we need to do is we need to check when we overlap our sphere. So to do that, we want to select our sphere, go all the way to the bottom to our event dispatchers, look for on component begin overlap and on component end overlap. We need both. And all we want to check for is if the other actor has the interact component. So look for get component by class. And if it has AC interact, so this one right here, then we can say, is it valid? And if it is valid, then that means that it does have that component. And so then we can say begin overlap. And with begin overlap, our target is self because this is the item we are overlapping. And so we're going to copy this and we're going to do the same thing on end overlap. And we're going to call the same logic, so a reroute, and we'll say end overlap. Plug in our self to the target, compile, save, and now if we run this, let's try. If we go over this, it should say hello. If we leave, it should say goodbye. There we go. So just testing if it goes on and off multiple times without any issues. And it does. So this is working just fine, and we should be done within here if I'm not incorrect. So close A items again, close this, or remove the prints, we don't need them. And I think we're going to need one last thing before we keep going, and that is we are going to need an UMG. And the reason we want a UMG is so that, for instance, when we go over an item like this, for instance, we can see what item we're trying to pick up and what button we might want to press. So go back to Gloomwood, go back to widgets, right click and search for user interface, widget blueprints. The default one will do. And we want to look for UMG underscore interact. And we will open this up. And what we want to do is we want to start with a scale box. And our scale box start by making sure the stretch is set to fill. Then we want a canvas panel and a second canvas panel. And the second canvas panel, we need to actually make it is editable. And we're going to call this CP icon. And the reason we're doing it this way, so I'll go through the kind of general idea of what we want to do before doing it, is we are going to tell our canvas panel here, our second one, where relative to the image here, where relative to our canvas panel, or a bigger one, our UMG, sorry, where in the world space does that convert to on the canvas panel, on the widget. And then we're going to move this one to that location and say, well, that's where it is. And relative to how the player turns, it will always be looking at the item. So we're trying to make this appear pretty much on the item. And so to do that, we then want to add, one last thing, we want to make sure this is centered. So alignment 0.5, alignment 0.5, and it is size to content. So we'll shrink here for a second. Then we want to look for a text box. So we're going to drag that in here. And we're going to make sure it is set to we want to make sure it's centered first. So right in the middle. We're going to put it at 0.5 on the alignment on the X, but not on the Y. Leave the Y as is. Put position to 0, -20, and 100 by 30 will do, but we're going to make sure this is Roboto light. And set the size of 14, so it's a bit smaller and above. Then we're going to add an image right here, and this image is going to be there. And the image we're going to use is we're just going to use our slot. So look for slot, and we're going to look for empty. And we want to make sure this is 30 by 30, and we're just going to rotate it to make it look a bit different from a normal slot. So make sure this is 45, and it is going to be anchored to the middle as well. And I just realized I think this isn't supposed to be middle, this is supposed to be top, and this should be -20, and this image is going to be centered. So here 0.5, 0.5 on the alignment, and just 0, 0. And we're also going to add a bit of text, which is going to be our key. So this is going to be here. And also I completely forgot, we want to make sure, let's delete that for a second, duplicate this text instead, that way it's the same size. And make sure this text box is a variable, because this is going to be our text box message. This is going to be where we're going to change and say, oh, interact for item I, or item B, or L block, or whatever. This one is just going to be the text pretty much for what letter we're using. And I just realized we don't want this to be like this, we want it to be justified into the center, and this as well. And then we're going to make sure this is centered in the middle at 0.5 on both alignments, and 0, 0, and this can be 30 because it's just going to have the letter F, because that's the key we are using. I want to make this a bit bigger. I think 20 will do. There we go. That looks a bit nicer. So right now, this is pretty much the basis of this. This is then going to be moved relative to the information we pass in here. So to do that, we need to do a bit of logic, and we just need one or two little things. So we're going to need to use the event tick for this. And there's no way around it. That's just, we have to do it that way. There's no real miracle solution here. So we're going to start first with a function, which we'll call update text. And what update text will do is it's going to get our text message. It's going to say set text, and that's going to be this one right here. And then we are going to set text. So we're going to format this. Now, for those who don't know how a format works, it just allows us to, for instance, say any kind of information. So let's say this is going to write pickup, but it can also allow us to add specific keys. I'm not exactly sure if that's the right term. So for instance, if I put A here in, I think, curly brackets, then it will say, oh, well, you can pass in a variable here. And so in our case, the two variables we want is the quantity, so how many we're picking up, which is going to be an integer, so quantity. And the second one is the name. So we're looking for the text. And so right here we have pickup amount A, so the item, and we'll say before it the quantity. Now put a space bar between the two, and now we'll make it pickup 5 item A. I'm just going to get rid of this for a second so that it appears after it. So it just kind of looks a bit tidier. There we go. So that's all we have to do for our big text. Next, we have to do our event tick. And so by default, sorry, we're going to call this here, and we're going to say that this is empty. That the quantity is 0, and that we'll call it empty. Now on tick though, what we want to do is we are going to get our CP icon here, and we are going to say slot as canvas slot. And what this means, once again, I'll repeat it because I did it in the last part, but it's not always easy to wrap your head around. What this means is that we're saying that this item here is within a canvas slot. And this can be done for grid, it can be done for button, it can be done for anything that can have children. And what it gives us is access to specific functions like set position in this case. And with set position, we can then do a little bit of math, and even that isn't much, because we get to have a very nice function which is called project world location to widget position. And all it needs is get player controller and a location. And that location is something we're going to pass by as we go, and that is going to be promoted to variable. We're going to call this world location. So just like that, we now have this widget. Now to test it, if it works, we're going to just add it to the screen. Not going to do anything with it, just going to add it for now. So in our AC interact again, and we don't need this anymore, so we can close UMG. We are going to say right here, we're going to say create widget. And the widget we want to create is UMG interact. We're going to promote this right here and call this our UMG interact ref. And then we're going to say add it to viewport. And that's the only test we're going to do for now. We're going to test this by compiling and saving and run it. And it's not very visible, but in the top left, you can see the little line here, which is the actual corner of our rectangular box or our square box that we rotated. And so in reality, we don't want it. We don't want it to be visible when we spawn because we might not be over an item. So we're just going to say set visibility to be hidden. And now we get to the better part, so to speak, the actual interaction stuff. So what we'll do first is we'll get our event tick because we need our event tick to update the information in the item. So we're going to make a very quick function here. So we're going to reroute, select this, right click, collapse the function, and call this update interact text. So open it up, and we're actually going to need a few more functions for this. So next we're going to need another function which is going to be called get closest actor. And as the name indicates, the point of this is to check which overlapping actor is the closest that we need. What we have to do for get, we have to do get closest first, and get closest can also be a pure. For each loop here, we're going to get our overlapping actors, we're going to go through them, and we're going to check the distance. We are going to say right here, we're going to promote this to a variable first. I'm going to say local, current actor. And with current actor, we're going to say get actor location. And we're then going to say get owner, get actor location. And so get owner, in this case, because we have an actor component, we are talking about its parent. So in our case, it is the player character. And we're going to say distance between these two. And that will tell us how far we are. Now, this alone isn't useful. We're going to promote it right here by saying L current distance. I don't know what I was writing there. Plug this in here. And next, we're going to make another duplicate, and we're going to call this L final or max distance. Right here. Grab it here, and we're going to check if our current distance, so get this, and say, is it inferior or equal to our max distance, or is max distance equal to -1? And the reason we do this is so that no matter what size you put, by default we need to put max distance to -1. And the reason we're doing this is because otherwise we would have to put max distance to a size larger than the item could potentially have. And because you might change that, we'll just put -1 as a default. And if it's -1, then we need to update it and say this is the closest item. So if either of these are true, so or, then we can change the new target or the new closest. So we're going to set our max distance to our current distance. And then we need to save the item that we want to save. So current needs to be promoted to another one, which we'll call return actor. And once we finish going through this loop, then we will have this be done by returning our return actor. So grab return actor, pass it here, and that will create the node, and we'll just call this return value. So now we can move on to our update interact. So close this, and we're going to say get closest actor. I'm going to promote this to a variable, and this will be called closest actor. And we just do this to avoid having to do it 10 times. And the next check is, well, actually before doing this, we can just say, is overlapping actors empty? We'll use is not empty. If it is not empty, then we have something we need to check. So we will then use true and say this is the closest actor. Then what we want is we want to get our world location, or get location of this actor. And we're going to pass that to our UMG interact by saying set world location. Plug it in right here. And we can also additionally do this, although this isn't optimal. It would be better to say whenever this changes, we do it, but just because this isn't the key point of the tutorial, I'm going to go kind of gloss over it. But we're going to say UMG here, update text, and we're going to get that information by going to our closest actor and saying get name. Like this, and this is what I mean by message, because we don't know what type it is because it's just an actor. We don't need to know, by the way, because we know it has a Blueprint interface. So then we're going to say get quantity and plug this in here, plug this in here, and this here. There we go. So this should be what it should look like at the end, and this should update the information as needed. Now, right now, this won't work because we haven't told it to be visible. So right here, we need to say this right here needs to display the information. So if we start hovering an item, we want to say set visibility to not hit testable self only. Sorry, not self and all children, just self only. And so now, if we play this, we compile, in the top left, we no longer have the actual widget, it's invisible. But if we go into range, it should appear here. And so there we go. And if we leave, it doesn't change because we haven't told it to lose it. But as you can see, if we turn around, it disappears off screen because it's no longer visible. But if we just move, it still stays fixed no matter where we are or what the camera is looking at, which was the whole point of this. Now, right now, it is always going to be at the pivot point because that is how it works. And obviously, if we F8, it's still locked there. But it's always going to be on the pivot point. And if you want to change that, you just have to change the actual coordinates in this specific thing. So instead of doing this, you would just say, oh, well, I have this specific coordinate that we can get. And you can always use the Blueprint interface to add something to share that information if that's what you want. But in our case, this is fine. It just gets the point across of where we want it. So if, once again, if you want to change where it is appearing instead of being on the pivot point, then you want to change this. Obviously, you want to keep the actor location, but you can add an offset like +1 on the X or whatever it is. So close this, and let's handle our remove from interaction, because that's where we're going to be able to say, well, we ignore it. And it's rather simple. There's not that much. It doesn't really need to be an actual blueprint itself. It's just easier to keep things tidy. We're going to get our overlapping. We're going to say remove item. Plug this in here. And then we're going to say if this is empty, meaning there are no items left, then we can actually say, well, we can hide the visibility. So we'll just copy this, paste this in, and we will say set to hidden. And to test if this works properly, we're going to make a second one that kind of overlaps. So if the player walks in between, it will see. And we can also test the distance. So if we stand here, it's going to say eye block. If we move here, it should move over there because now it realizes we are closer to that one. Same here, and obviously that's how it works. Now, if we move off, it disappears. If we move in between, it reappears again. And if we move further away, it now knows one of them is only there, but it still keeps message until we leave the zone entirely. So this is working also, just as intended. Now, the next bit is this. It's the pickup. So I'm going to remove the event tick here, and we're going to move the pickup a bit below. So the pickup is where we're going to finally start using our interaction, our animation. In Gloomwood, go to our assets, go to our skeletal mesh, and we want to replace our end grab, or not replace it, sorry, we want to right click it, and we want to say create anim montage. And in the anim montage, so we'll call this montage grab, open it up. And here, right now, the animation works. It should be working just fine if you follow the steps that I showed you. And what we want is we don't want to have it so that we just play animation and it picks up instantly. We want to make sure it picks up once the hand hits the ground. Well, this isn't perfect because if an item is up high, it doesn't matter. This is just kind of basic thing here. So if the item is on the ground and the player reaches the ground, we want to make sure that it actually kind of stops here, and here says we pick up the item. Now, one issue with this is, for instance, you could say, oh, well, let's just tell it to wait 51 frames and then we'll pick it up. But if you have something that changes, for instance, the animation all of a sudden plays faster because you have a boost or something like that, that the rate is different here, then you'll have a problem. So the way that you work around this in Unreal is you can have notifies. And so what notifies are is they pretty much allow you to say specifically something happens here. Yeah, so on the notifies here, make sure you're selected around this area. You want to right click and say add notify. And what we're looking for is, I believe it is a montage notify right here. And so the important thing about this is you want to make sure you change the name to something. So in the notify name here, so notify here, you want to change it to, for instance, we'll call it take item. So normally if we close this and open it up again, it should now say take item. There we go. And so what this will mean is in here, when we say play montage, we can tell it to play that animation for our grab. And here we can say, oh, that action got called. Let's do something. So right here, we want to first make sure of a few things. Even if we trigger, we want to make sure that we have an item to pick up. So we're going to say is not empty. So if it is not empty, we can actually pick something up. So let's start by having that. So if we go and add a print here and we play right here, if we press F, nothing happens. But if we go here, we get hello. Works. Good. Next step. Now we want to check, do we have a skeletal mesh? Because we need to know what's animating. So we're going to say get owner. And so this is now the player character. It's a reference to our player character. So we can say, okay, let's get a component by class. And that component we're looking for is a skeletal mesh. Does the skeletal mesh exist? We check if it's valid. So it is valid. We can do another check right here to see if this works. So let's put a print. So now it checks both of those conditions. If we press F here, we get hello. If not, we're outside of the zone, so it still doesn't work. So now that we have both of those, we can tell it to say is valid, play montage. This is the skeleton we want to move or play the montage on. And make sure you select your grab, and most likely is the only one you have, so choose that. And now right here, we have our notify begin. So if we put a print here, normally the instant our hand hits the ground, we should get our hello. Not at the beginning, but then. So if we press F, our player bends down and we get the hello once his hand hits the floor. So we just want to tell it, well, when that happens, do something. And in our case, it's going to be pick up the item. So right here, we're going to add a reroute. We're going to collapse to a function. And we're going to say, try pick up item. Now, we're not going to do this today because it's going to take a lot of time on its own. So for now, we're going to leave this here. But what we want to do is we want to make sure, is it the right one? Because some of you, maybe going further down the line, will have multiple actual notifies here. And the reason you can give it a name is because you can tell it exactly what you want to call it. So in our case, it's going to be called take item. That's the name we gave it in our actual montage. So just double check that you have specifically this right here. You copy it and you paste it right here. You press enter, you can compile, and if it is anything else, it will go out here. If it is what you said here, it will appear here. So if we try again, let's put a print. Let's try this. If we go and press F, we get our hello just fine. So that does it for this part, I believe. I think that covers everything that I was looking to do today. I hope you enjoyed. It is a bit still not on the inventory itself, but I want to get sure everything around it is ready before we do anything else. And I believe in the next part, we're going to start getting into, well, just that. So hope you look forward to that. Once again, I want to thank everybody on Patreon for supporting me, and I hope you will look forward to the next part. Well, I will see you then. Goodbye.